This is WZRD Chicago, 88.3 FM. And we have with us at WZRD via Zoom, Ben Scholz. He is a drummer, percussionist. He was an artist in Chicago for a couple of years, but now he resides mostly on the West Coast. And let us hear more about Ben from Ben himself. Hi, Ben. How are you today?
Hi, Trudy. Can you hear me?
Yes. Let me. Uh, yeah. Could you let's try that again?
Okay. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I
Okay,
can.
great.
Okay. There's
Hi.
like a little. It's like you're in a room with like a high
An
ceilings.
echo. Yeah.
Yes.
So there's a piano lesson going on in the other room
Oh,
here. So if you can hear me and this works for you,
yeah.
then
It
great.
it works. It works. Beautiful.
Okay.
Okay, Ben. First, tell us a little bit about yourself. I'm so glad that we got to talk on the phone and then we're talking now.
Yeah, of course. So I am a musician, drummer, a record producer, promoter, and a cinematographer. And I lived here in Chicago for about 12 years. I was in Los Angeles for about 8, 9 years, and I recently relocated back to my hometown of Portland, Oregon. So I'm splitting my time between Portland, Oregon, and Los Angeles.
Hmm. Yeah, are you uh do some other work as well? It seems as if you're also a director of the youth jazz ensemble. Is that helping some underprivileged youth?
Well, okay, that was when I was full time in Los Angeles. I was the
Ah,
director of the Los Angeles Youth Jazz Ensemble.
oh,
It was sponsored by University of Southern California, so
oh,
they gave us the space. It was part of my graduate program that I then parlayed into doing some work for some local schools. So it was, for the most part, it was under the Los Angeles Youth Jazz Ensemble, but I'm not currently doing that anymore.
oh, okay. Oh, so you are also a producer too. You said that you also helped out on WGN 9 as well as a producer. What was you have such a
Oh.
extensive resume.
Yes, and maybe I mean, I should update some of that. The WGN stuff that I did was when I was in Chicago. It was a few of those noontime performances. I had also worked with some other people from very offshoots of that, where we did things at the White Sox park, various events and things like that. So that was in more of a musician capacity when I was doing stuff for WGN 9. But it was more the production that I did when I was in Los Angeles was, for some of the more the larger networks like CBS. I think Warner Brothers was, and these were like non-airing pilots, writing some music for this for programs that were, that were under these major, umbrellas, these networks. And like I was in the bio that I sent you, it was a kind of, I'm glad that you asked me to do this interview because it gave me an opportunity to sort of go over and like, oh yeah, so like, what am I doing right now? And I'm pretty much out of that commercial world. I'm much more in just the non-commercial, producing music for up and coming jazz artists or well-known artists that are maybe trying to do tours in clubs and venues that they may not have considered when they were doing larger tours. I mean, you can go to the website and look at the people that we're working with right now. Um, it's a whole hodgepodge of musicians. There's people that are just graduating from college or maybe in their early 20s, and they are trying to get their music out to media, whatever that means. There's well-known jazz legends that we're working with that are like I said, maybe they are used to national or even world tours, and now are just looking at the more smaller venues that they want to play more intimate clubs. But really, I kind of got burnt out on the whole commercial world, and just really firmly entrenching myself in the non-commercial world as a part of the production that I'm doing has been much more, I guess, artistically satisfying.
There was that very interesting album that you promoted recently, that the Cambodian Agonistas.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was from the classical group, right?
So
Yes,
that was the Royal Scottish
yes,
Orchestra.
yes, yes. Hmm.
That's a very interesting project. It's kind of fascinating. I wish it had gotten some better traction on radio and just anywhere. It's old, and it was an off Broadway production. I don't even. I'd have to look at the liner notes to tell you. It was probably late '90s, early 2000s. It did not get good reviews. The musical flopped. It was sort of seen as derivative. I don't really know the ins and outs, but the composer, or rather the one of the composers, is Louis is based in Boston and Berkeley, but the composer that turned me onto that project, Kevin Koska, is a wonderful orchestrator and arranger. I think he would prefer to be known as a composer, and I think he's one of the best Hollywood composers out there right now. I mean, I love his music, and I've been thrilled to produce film for his performances. Some of the earlier albums that he put out, like Artistry with Arturo Sandoval. I did all the editing with my partner at the time for all of the videos that he put out. We recorded a United recording. He also has a Brazilian project that Arturo was featured on. A number of wonderful, like, classic Hollywood orchestra style um, albums. That the Cambodia Agnistas, unfortunately, just I'm glad that you appreciated it, because it doesn't seem like a whole lot of other people appreciated it. So maybe you could tell me why it resonated with you.
Well, I think it has a lot of soul. It reflects the times, and I think the music is beautiful. The lyrics are beautiful as well. So he wrote all the songs,
Um,
most of them.
that musical was written by now you got I want to know.
That's okay.
I was I'll have to go look at my notes here, because I'm curious.
Mhm. It's the cover was beautiful. Everything about it was very, very nice. And
Yeah.
we at Wizard here, our at Wizard WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM, our people over here, they loved it too.
So that musical was written by Louis Stewart.
Mm.
I worked with Louis at United Recording on a couple projects. He's a professor at Berkeley, I think. I don't know if he's still there. He was an interesting guy, very talented conductor, especially when he was conducting the orchestras that we were filming. Um, I again, if it's I can send you some links for the musical. It was every review that I read of it was really poorly received
Mm.
on Broadway. They did not like it
Mm.
in the New York
Mm.
theater scene. And I was surprised that he wanted to push this album as much as he did. But I mean, it's a strong album. The compositions are wonderful. I think it was probably the content and maybe the acting that they just didn't like. But that's the
Mm.
type of thing that happens all the time with these big orchestra projects, especially ones that were either on Broadway or off Broadway, or maybe we're in some sort of film, whatever it is. Sometimes the music is really great, but if the acting or the play is just not, it doesn't hit right with an audience, or it doesn't get the marketing that it deserves, sometimes it's just a flop, and that happens.
Maybe sometimes it was just coming out at the wrong time. It's sometimes that happens as well. Who knows? Maybe if it were coming out now, it would be a different matter.
Well, he also wanted to do all the marketing for it almost a decade after the musical had been on Broadway. So it's I, I took it, and maybe sort of somewhat reluctantly took it as a project. I mean, I'm glad I did. I love Kevin's, and Kevin only had a tangential relationship with this project. But if you like that album, I highly recommend checking out Kevin Costco's, uh, his individual, his own recordings and his own productions. I mean, he's a very well known Hollywood composer. He's worked with like Chris Nolan on the Batman movies, and he writes for the Seth MacFarlane vehicle. Uh, what's the name of the Orwell, the the television show, which I don't know, maybe it's been canceled at this point, but he's it really is. Kevin is my top 10 Los Angeles composers
Mhm.
for sure. But anyway.
Well, you were you a musician first, or were you what started you on this career? How young were you when you decided that music or acting or production was in your blood?
Um, I mean, my dad was a percussionist up here at Northwestern. My parents are, well, my dad's from Minnesota, but my parents are basically from Chicago, and this was so the sort of Chicago roots of music and all of that. It, my dad was a theory major, so but he also played drums, and we had drums around the house. Piano was sort of the first thing that we were all as kids. Me and my brothers were encouraged to take up. I don't play as much piano now anymore, but that was sort of the genesis of my musical endeavors. I went to North Texas for my undergrad. USC is where I went later in life, and that introduced me to the Los Angeles scene. But music has just always been part of my life. In Chicago, I was jobbing 3 to 5 nights a week. Very active in both the jazz and the blues scene. LA was it was tough, kind of a tougher nut to crack, especially trying to be like a studio musician. I quickly saw that there was going to be a ceiling there, especially with just the way that the studios have sort of fallen off and gone out of business, and a lot of music now is just outsourced, or there's just not a lot of work for live studio musicians unless you are in that like top 5%.
Mhm.
So in LA, I was not gigging as much as I was, but the gigs that I was playing, the music that I was playing and continue to play both in LA, in Portland, are they're the highest quality caliber music, and with the highest quality caliber musicians that I could really ask for to play. So I'm only like now I'm really just trying to only play the gigs and the music that I want to play with the musicians that I want to play with.
Mhm. Well, at least you're able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody's able to play music if they want to, and that's an important part of their life. I don't think anybody should be discouraged playing music, and I think that everybody, unless I don't know, but I think everybody does have enough time to do it and to practice. I think just practice is the key.
Mhm. And is it hard to get gigs? Some of my musician friends, it's very hard for them to get gigs.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it all depends on where you are. I mean, it's
Mhm.
going to be hard to get a gig in like, I don't know where you're from. Are you from?
Chicago, yeah. We have a good friend that's a very good percussionist, and he's always trying to get more gigs.
Yeah, well, I mean, Chicago is probably the best place in the United States to just find a gig.
Mhm.
And I didn't think that living here, even though I was playing all the time, it was kind of this, oh, well, why do I have to play at this steakhouse or why do I have to play at this like, church function or something like that. They weren't the gigs I necessarily wanted to play, but there were gigs, and it's easy to just come back to the city maybe every other month or whatever it is, and immediately just jump right back into the gigging scene where I can, either play rehearsals with people or sit in on their gigs at any of the clubs in this town, with, exception of maybe, a few, and it's frictionless. It's easy. I think that once you get out of Chicago, you really realize, especially in cities like New York and LA, how competitive it is. And I think it's not just competitive with the musicians, it's also competitive for just a physical space. And
Mm.
that even a small restaurant or bar on the outskirts of, the boroughs in New York City or on the outskirts of LA and the neighboring counties, the real estate is so expensive that if it's a restaurant or some sort of, public open space to have music, that there's going to be rent and there's going to be employees that need to be paid. And so if you're bringing in a band or you're trying to do something musically, performance wise, the bar or restaurant that might have that gig is also looking at the bottom line and what they have to pay. And if it's not worth it for them to open their doors and you can't bring in enough people to make that warrant that, they're just going to cancel the gig. Numerous times in New York or in LA, I've had plane tickets to go out there to play at places that I've played before, only to have them the month or a few weeks before. And this is kind of lately happening. They tell me, I just can't keep my doors open for that, or I have to do something else because I'm not sure that you'll be able to fill the house or bring enough people in. And to say, well, hey, I just I have a plane ticket and I have to bank those miles with Delta or whatever. I had this all scheduled and I had clients. It makes frustrates me, but I do understand when a venue just can't make the ends meet, and unfortunately, the musicians get the short end of that stick sometimes.
Mhm. So, if that's the case, then a lot of musicians would be gravitating toward Chicago. Is Chicago a more lively scene now uh, because of the situation?
I think I don't know. I had this conversation with so many people,
Mhm.
and the Midwest is a good area
Right.
for live gigs.
Mhm.
Anywhere. It doesn't matter. Like if you're here, you can go up to Milwaukee, you can go down to Indy, you can go out to Des Moines, or you can even take a road trip and get to like Detroit. I mean, that's this whole area from New York to like one thing somebody told me is that the term if it plays in Peoria.
Yeah, we could. Some of our listeners might not, so just explain.
Okay, so it's something that I had not really understood about what touring was like in the 40s and the 50s, all the way probably to like the 70s. Is there's this term that, and you probably hear it in the Midwest, it's called "if it plays in Peoria," and basically what that was is Peoria up until air travel was the end of the line for touring from New York to the Midwest. So Peoria has a bunch of beautiful, performing arts theaters, all that type of stuff. And it was like if you could get a show, vaudeville or whatever it was, if you could launch that in New York and then you took that road and you went from maybe down to Philly or up and over to Pittsburgh, and then Detroit, and then through Ohio, Cincinnati, Cleveland, whatever it is, down to Indy, up to Chicago, you weren't necessarily going to cross the Mississippi River. So you would stop at Peoria. So Peoria was the last town that you could play in. And it didn't matter if you were doing, if it hit in on Broadway or if it did well in any of these Midwestern towns. What you had to do was you had to make sure that it was going to play in Peoria, because if it played in Peoria, it would play anywhere. So all this just sort of like suffice to say that the Midwest has a culture of interest in live performance, and people do go out in this area where it's not too expensive, and there's just a culture that understands the value of live performance. So there's always, to get back to what you were saying, and your percussionist friend here, if you're in this town especially, but if you're in any of the neighboring towns and you make it your priority, you will find a gig in the Midwest, in Chicago.
Hey, thanks for that. So first up, I guess when you must have started out with piano and then drifted into percussions, right? When you were at home, you learned the piano first.
Okay. Yeah. Well, my grandmother was a pianist, or was a piano teacher. My dad grew up in Rochester. My grandfather was an endocrinologist at the Mayo Clinic. But my grandmother, who was an RN during the war, was also a piano teacher. And so they had, 2 pianos in the house. She was good friends with Jane Smyser Bastian, who, if any pianists out there, especially any piano teachers, are definitely going to know the Bastian series of elementary school piano books. So that was kind of the understanding on at least the arts side. Both my parents are attorneys, but the sort of understanding that we were going to participate in the arts as children was something that was just assumed that we were going to practice that hour or so a day, that we were going to do piano recitals, that we were going to take weekly piano lessons. I also played soccer and stuff like that. I enjoyed outdoor activities, but the music side of things, especially growing up as children, even though my parents weren't like full-time musicians, it was just assumed that the piano, and I think rightly so, that piano sort of being, at least for Western music, being the linchpin or the foundation of any real, Western music education.
You played in a band in Logan Square based in Logan Square for a while?
Yeah. Let's see. So I was in Avondale, Logan Square area when I left. I first moved here. I was living in Lincoln Park, and then I moved. So I was in Logan Square for probably 9 years. It wasn't. I mean, it's that neighborhood is. I mean, I think it's a really cool neighborhood. At the time, it was not built up, or it was trendy, but it wasn't. It was still getting there. Like Wicker Park had sort of turned around and was a more popular area, and Logan Square was sort of, a little bit more suburban. Now it's kind of gentrified, just the same way that any of those stops on the Blue Line are. But yeah, I mean, I was just there last night. It's cool.
What is the band that you play with?
The band that I play with. I mean, I reconnected with a fellow Chicagoan. Well, he's not from Chicago, but Scott Anderson, who lives in Portland now, and so we played his quintet's music fairly frequently. I was just in Los Angeles performing with a wonderful composer named Bevan Manson. I'll be co-producing his large ensemble album, which is coming out in July. Also, a good friend of mine, Teodros Avery, I'm playing a trio with him. We're going to hopefully play later in this summer when I go down to back to Los Angeles and hopefully do the Idlewild Festival in North Palm Springs. So there's a lot of different, musicians, a lot of different just projects I'm involved on right now.
Good for you. Uh, you mentioned that you're going to be at the Green Mill too to watch someone.
Oh yeah, we're okay. So yeah, I'm just filming this, or hopefully
Ah,
filming it. We'll see what happens. But yeah, Steve Smith,
mm,
drummer from Journey and Vital Information. He's got the Vital Information group is playing there Saturday night. So
awesome.
check that out. I don't have any more gigs. This for my trip here. It's just going to be, hanging out with people, DJs and other musicians for clients and things like that. So if you're anybody who's listening who wants to have lunch, I'm here for another week.
What about your mentors? It seems as if as you moved along your career, you met a lot of fellow musicians and who became your mentors. Would you like to talk about them a little bit?
Yeah, of course. It's funny, and thank you for emailing me because I did look at my bio and it was a shock. It was like, oh my gosh, I need to update this. This is like a decade old. Um, yeah, mentor wise, my my career really changed with the instruction from Peter Erskine. And he definitely, and I've told him this too, and he would probably just shrug his shoulders and say, "Oh, no," but I mean, he was instrumental in the just changing like the way that I play, sort of my approach to music, as well as being the doorway into the commercial music scene in Los Angeles. I don't think that I would have been able to get a foot in the door in LA in the any sort of capacity if it weren't for him and Bob Mintzer. So those are the two kind of, if I was to look back on my on a hinging point in my career, would be working with those two and everybody that was a teaching at University of Southern California at the time, Alfonso Johnson or Patrice Rushen, whoever these, and I'm probably Russ Ferrante, Indugu Chancellor before he passed. It was wonderful to study with him and learn about, all his work with Michael Jackson and Frank Sinatra and stuff like that. So um, that was a turning point in my career. That was, and then in terms of other mentors that I've had throughout my career, um, I mean, they would be, for better or for worse, Ed Soph at University of North Texas, Neil Slater, just sort of like introducing me to to big band idiom, playing as a drummer in big bands, which is, is much different than, could be argued than like a small group and whatever. But
Mhm,
in terms of mentors, the biggest influence on my life would be probably Peter Erskine.
mhm. And what about Bob Mintzer? How did you meet him?
Well, Bob was the head of the program at USC when I was there. So when I was as a grad student, my duties sort of flowed up to him. He was sort of the boss
Mhm,
of the program. It's great. It's like it. It's you kind of get starstruck sometimes. Like here's this composer that I've been listening to, following for my entire life, and now I'm sitting in a like a faculty meeting with him, a cup of coffee, talking, and and we're just talking about the most basic of like how to sort of move through the school and move through the LA scene and just nuts and bolts type of things. But here I am having coffee with Bob Mintzer and the dean of the school and all that, and I'm wearing a button-down shirt and it's nice. And then then a few hours later, I go to vibrato and Herb Alpert's there, and Bob's introducing me to Herb Alpert, while he's playing with the Yellow Jackets. So it was kind of a mind, it was a very, my experiences with these and with Peter as well, and other, Gordon Goodwin or whatever, it was very, it's still, it really is like meeting a celebrity, but then all of a sudden having to like work with that person, and and you're sort of starstruck, but at the same time it's like, oh, okay, well now I have to be a pro here. So that was my experience with Bob Mintzer. I mean, I hope that answers your question.
Oh, yes, definitely. What was the most important thing that Bob Mintzer and Peter Erskine taught you? Would you say that you feel is most important for what you're doing? Lots of things I know.
Yeah, it's like, well, Peter especially, this will resonate with any drummers that might be listening, but he had so many little just isms, let's call them, be like, you don't have to save the world with your drum solo. Um, yeah, those types of things, like, music is, or rests are silent notes.
Mhm.
These very succinct, almost like like Peter loves Japanese culture, and so his everything that he would say was like very zen and very like it put very thought out. Where Bob is like, he's no BS. You can't mm, you have to be honest with him, and as soon as he gets this sense that somebody's not being honest, or trying to we're on the radio, so I'm not going to use say the word, but BS, he kind of shuts down. He is a and he doesn't like talk a lot. He's definitely an activist in that he politically he's definitely a feels a certain way about politics. Sorry, I'm just rambling on that. But I mean, he's a consummate musician. Yeah, he's a writer. He's a composer. That's what he does all day. Like, I think that's just where his personality lies. Is just somebody who is singularly focused on composing music, writing music, practicing, recording, and performing.
Hmm. It's funny because you say that Peter Erskine and Bob Mintzer help you get your foot in the door for commercial wise, but they're very down to earth, and then uh, they they're more concerned with the basics, it seems, than uh, with commercial. Is some of what you learned from them convince you to now step back into the non-commercial space?
Well, I guess if I get you, let me kind of paraphrase what you were saying, because there was a lot there that I'm trying to. Um, yes, Peter Erskine and Bob Mintzer, they're just people, so they're very down to earth, and they're very humble when it comes to being musicians. Um, they both definitely work within the commercial world. I mean,
Mhm.
the projects that I've, either just witnessed, like going to, with Peter to Warner Brothers or Sony or whatever it is, was, or the projects I worked on with Bob, the video game projects, just, um, sort of observing what he was doing less than actually getting paid to do any work. Um, they're within the commercial realm, but they're just musicians. They're just composers. They're just, they don't really, they have no marketing. They don't not have marketing skills, but they're not associated with labels directly, or they're just they're just pros. They're just professional musicians.
Hmm.
So um, I don't know if that answers your question
Yes.
about the commercial versus non-commercial, but like they're they are non-commercial people. They're just people that are really good musicians,
Mhm.
and they are contracted out on a temporary basis to do the thing that they do for, major motion pictures or pop albums or things that you would just hear in your normal life. And they're not employees of, networks or studios or anything like that. They they're the Bob Mintzer and Peter Erskine. The same can be said for anybody who's a quote famous musician. That could be, um, I don't know, that could be Diana Krall or Pat Metheny or anybody like that. Harry Connick Jr. Think of the most famous jazz musician that you know, and they're not like a product of corporate America. They're just really good musicians, and they are they deserve the accolades that they get.
Yes. I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
Yeah, they're most concerned about their music. Being successful is great, but still at heart, what's most important to them is their music and their work.
Yeah, and it has to be like that. You can't bend to the corporate will
Mhm.
eh, if if you're going to be creating music and creating art. You have to create it for yourself and be driven that way. And ultimately, the success of that is not going to be guaranteed. You could be the most talented musician in the world, but if you're not applying that talent towards working and practicing and getting your music out there, it's not going to happen for you. And even if you do, there's no guarantee that it's going to happen for you. These are conversations I know that we could have for hours, and they're the subjects of intense academic study. But ultimately, why one person is more successful than another, I don't know.
Did you mention that Bob Mintzer composed some music for video games? Tell us a little bit about that.
Trudy, you cut out for a
Oh,
second.
oh, sorry. Did Bob Mintzer create some music, compose some music for video games?
Yeah, and he's been getting more into that realm, as a lot of musicians are.
Mm,
It's just a it's just a really it's a one large format change.
mm,
Music being where music was able to be sold on records and CDs in the 60s, 70s, 80s,
mm,
90s. And then people started writing music for film. Well, that's been going on since the 40s
mhm.
and earlier. But as that format has changed and migrated towards video games, um, I know a lot of musicians. My cousin, who is a bassist in Los Angeles, has been working on music or large orchestral productions at Sony for Splinter Cell and God of War, a whole bevy of sequential, episodic, I guess you could call it, video game music.
Mhm.
It's probably the one profitable sector of the large orchestral composing um, side of the music business.
Oh, I had no idea about that. Hmm.
Oh yeah, I mean it's a $1 billion industry,
Mhm.
and probably more secure, at least for composers, than the the film industry. I would say in the next 10 years that more people will be writing music and performing and recording music for video games than they will be for motion pictures.
Mm. You mentioned that you're moving into the non-commercial space now. Could you describe what kind of work you're doing in non-commercial?
Yeah, I mean, I've always done radio promo, and I've always been it's always been the sort of the linchpin of my business. The is distributing music to people like you all over the country and the world, to especially with digital promotion and the ability to send that out. Um, I have I've delved more into the film world, cinematography, but for almost no money. That's been more of a pet project. Although it's worked hand in hand with the production of media for for music and the distribution of it. Um, uh, I'm not opposed to working in the quote commercial field. I think it's all just about who's able to hire,
Mhm.
mar, marketers, distributors.
Mhm.
Sometimes it seems like the commercial world is sort of set on more commercial music, and
Mhm.
jazz and classical music is not very commercial. In fact, it's kind of the opposite of commercial. So I'm a jazz drummer. I know jazz musicians, so I'm going to work with other jazz musicians and jazz inspired music.
Mhm.
That's and by nature, it is very non-commercial unless you're Michael Bublé or somebody like that.
Mhm.
And nothing against Michael Bublé. It's just that's a different part of this whole musical thing.
Mhm. And for our listeners who might not be familiar with non-commercial, that means community radio and college stations, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Mhm.
yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It's anybody who's going to be a nonprofit, or anybody who, like you said, is associated with a college or academic, endeavor.
Mhm.
It's not going to be CBS, or there's maybe some overlap with Sirius XM. Sirius XM would probably be, or Music Choice would be the most commercial of the entities that I follow. The Billboard chart, sometimes, I've had Gordon Goodwin projects show up on the Billboard chart, but that's all by virtue of again, the commercial animation work that he's scored for, and the film work. So it's um it's tangential to everything that we're working with, but again, just getting your WZRD or WDCB or any of the other stations with call letters, that is by definition non-commercial, and it's just the world that both you and I work in.
Mhm. Well, Ben Scholz, musician, percussionist, radio promoter, thank you so much for joining us on WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM today. And if our listeners want to learn more about you or have more questions, do you have any contact information for them?
Yeah, sure. The website is scholzproductions.com. My last name is spelled Scholz. Info at benjaminschultz.com if you want to reach out to me. Otherwise, if you're in Chicago, and like I said, this is my time to have a cup of coffee or hang out with people. So I'm just down the street playing music. Hit me up. Let's have a cup of coffee.
All right. Thank you so much, Ben. We'll talk soon. Have a
All
great
right,
one.
peace.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Trudy.